Patrick's also a historian, a comedian.
Should we be taking notes?
You're welcome to.
I kind of am. You're responsible for anything that goes up on the board.
Oh, really?
I thought he was speaking in mime.
Yeah, secret pass.
Wow.
That's your escape room. Something back there.
Hello. I'm going to read a little something. It's entitled, "The Horse That Is of Course. General Semantics as a Chivalric Approach to the Familiar." And again, here, the quotation from Maurice Blanchot. "Moreover, this power that language has to hide itself, which language exercises by communicating to us the illusion of immediacy, when in fact it gives us only the habitual, makes us believe that the immediate is familiar, and not a most terrible thing which ought to overwhelm us." Circumstances, time. She was late for her train, and the subsequent speed of her gait unloosed the scarf from her neck. From where it landed, I sat but 3 feet on a wooden bench. Not yet thoroughly abstracted, I went to the scarf, picked it up, and trotted to where she was now in line. Upon my return and the return of my breath, the 77-year-old man, who had been my benchmate, sat in silence for the last 2 hours, spoke in a manner that required my listening. On the edge of this verbal world, there were no lips to be read, as both our gazes were still forward to the spot on the floor that collected our speech. He said, "Ah, the age of chivalry is still alive." Obviously, my act was nothing special or profound, nothing that I feel comfortable associating with the history and or legends of chivalry, nor the complex praxis of general semantics. But when holding him to his word and the word to the world, chivalric gestures in themselves, I am left to wonder, in this tale of the scarf, where exactly was chivalry located? I do realize he was being a bit salty, his thick Kiwi accent pressed through chuckle and smile. Though even with the sarcastic tone, this word still entered the scene and affected our attention. So if chivalry was not present in my simple and obvious action, perhaps it was that which drew this man out from the silence and pleasant self-space into speech and toward another. I do not mean to imply that chivalry has some inherent relationship with talking, but that it might operate, or maybe even reveal, the ocean of space between oneself and the other. Ocean of space is a term that I take from William Carlos Williams, and this is the quotation where it comes from. "There is a constant barrier between the reader and his consciousness of immediate contact with the world. If there is an ocean, it is here, or rather, the whole world is between. Yesterday, tomorrow, Europe, Asia, Africa, all things removed and impossible. The tower of the Church of Seville, the Parthenon." I want to use just a brief narrative of a trip that I made to Australia that involves a horse named Alfred. The immediacy of my situation revealed a fact whose simplicity was as unavoidable as it was lamentable. The horse knew that I did not know. Yes, despite the impressive bow of my legs, I had actually never been on a horse until then. This fearful symmetry, the way my legs always already frame or assume a horse, as my friends joke that I must have ridden horses for years, or that I have just come from riding one. Alas, this ride was my first, though I do have over 20 years of experience in the saddle of sarcasm. And after succumbing to the comfort of its unfortunate fit, dare I say I've gained some skill with it. Regrettably, this skill meant absolutely nothing to Alfred, my horse for the day. But really, it was much worse than that. For the failure of my cleverness, my linguistic facility to contact Alfred made me even more nervous. And this did, ultimately and unfortunately, contact him. It was thus 5 feet up, with legs stretched around his belly ribs, that I felt most grounded in my body, in the severity of embodiment. Being half horse, I was in fact most fully human. As soon as we mounted our respective steeds, our guide, a young woman named Becca, began to give us the first important instruction. Her words were quickly interrupted by the high-pitched and panicky yelp of our Swedish friend Jasper, who was prematurely trotting down the path backwards on his horse. Hello, excuse me. It was unclear whether he was talking to our guide or his horse. He had moments before put the wrong foot in the stirrup, started up on the wrong foot, so to speak. And the sheer momentum required to mount a horse masked this fact. It was apparent only when it was irreversible, when his gaze extended out over his horse's ass. The sight of him under his small white helmet allowed the rest of us novices some hearty laughter, a welcomed outlet for the nervousness we had otherwise no way to address. Eventually, after Jasper was situated properly, facing forward on his horse, our guide, Becca, was able to relay the first necessary instruction, though not without a mix of consequence and preemptive annoyance. You are not, under any circumstances, to allow the horses to eat grass at any point during this trip. We let them graze all morning, but they'll still try to eat any chance they get. Our guide made it seem that the horses were set on taking advantage of us. And if they did, we should feel an appropriate amount of humiliation and shame. As the severity of her speech began to sink in, I looked around and down to find that Alfred and all the other horses were already eating grass. It is as if her speech about the gluttony and their essential role in policing them provided the perfect opportunity to grab a quick meal. So I, and all the other deputized fools, spent most of our beautiful trip on guard and in negotiation with our horses, trying to convince them that it was not in their best interest to eat the grass. I couldn't hear how my friends handled it. Just the occasional yell and laugh that accompanies the thrill and trill of direct living. With my tone, though, I tried to express my potential disappointment with my horse, to my horse. Not only did we not deserve their schemes, but we would not tolerate them. The ineffectiveness of this method forced me to try something different. I would make a deal with him. Okay, Alfred, I said. This is the situation. You take me down the hill through this little creek and up the other side safely. I will allow you to fill your belly with greens. Not sure he heard me, though. He was noisy, his jaw busy, grinding grass. Just as we left the forest, through the trees, of course, our eyes adjusted to the light and blue, to a sky with ocean. We dismounted and tied the horses to a log of the high grass. For the first time in hours, our legs returned. They returned us, and to them. An exchange? An exchange. But for what exactly? What for what? Or where had they been, these legs we just so happened to now have? Fully stretched out inside them, trying out their legness as it were, I heard my name emerge from the unbuckling of saddles, a sign that I'd just been volunteered to go first. This honor of going first was first of all no honor. I didn't even know what going first meant, except that it meant nothing good, or at least nothing for which anyone would ever volunteer. So from out under the confusion of knots of leather with strings, I shuffled out towards our guide Becca. Pretty much continuously since the beginning of morning, I'd been requesting instruction from her, or maybe she was simply in the vicinity of my insistent expression. I needed to have something over Alfred other than my body. If Alfred would not listen, to whom could I appeal if not her? And so in front of her smiling self, I mounted him bareback, which is to say he was the one bareback. I was dressed immaculately, fully tourist, in sunburn and excessively pocketed shorts. Once Becca noticed that I noticed she was smiling without warning, the amusement in her face left, was replaced by a grunt which gathered her strength into a fierce slap against Alfred's ass. Hi-ya! Alfred and I took off toward the surf. There was only one thought I could muster, for I was in total, solely a man trying to stay on a horse. Is Walter smiling? And then, without break, its abstraction, can horses smile? The uselessness of this thought mattered little, for almost immediately came the bumps, the bumps, the bumps. I must have touched each bone of his back as they one by one unsaddled me of sarcasm's unfortunate fit. Floating horizontally with my arm around Walter's neck, I kicked. We ride from the beach into the ocean. Floating horizontally with my arm around Walter's neck, I kicked just enough to hold my position, to keep to the ocean's surface and avoid the mess of hooves below. Although the surface was safer, it presented its own problems. When a horse enters the ocean, when the ground is fully removed from its trot and it begins to float, the contents of its stomach release. I was therefore not the only thing floating in the vicinity. My appreciation of what must have been an immensely pleasurable feeling for the horse was not strong enough to offset the compulsion to retreat. I loosened my hold, treaded carefully away, and returned to the shore.